DeepSeek V4 Pro runs at 0.435 per million input tokens on OpenRouter, and OpenCode can run it for free if you bring your own key. That's a zero subscription coding stack, and it changes what you're actually paying per week. Open weight models are getting cheap fast, so I'm putting DeepSeek V4 Pro against OpenCode across 5 tests to see who actually wins. There's a catch with how these two tools are built that changes which one you should actually pay for, and I'll get to that in the final verdict. My name is Brian, and I'm in these tools 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be. Every number in this comparison traces back to sources both companies actually publish. If you're running 10 million tokens a week, picking wrong costs you real money every single day. Test 1, cost. The day you realize you're paying a $10 monthly subscription on top of your API bill, you've already double dipped and you didn't have to. A solo dev running 5 million tokens a month needs to know exactly what each option costs before committing, because the wrong choice stacks up fast. So I went through the pricing pages, and here's what I found. DeepSeek V4 Pro is 0.435 per million input tokens and 0.87 per million output tokens on OpenRouter. OpenCode's Go plan is $10 a month after a $5 first month, but there's a free tier if you bring your own API key, so you pay zero markup on model costs. What surprised me is that these two aren't really competing on the same axis. DeepSeek V4 Pro takes cost. OpenCode's flat fee looked like it might be competitive on paper, but at 0.435 per million tokens with no subscription layer, V4 Pro is just dramatically cheaper per token for anyone running real volume, and that puts DeepSeek V4 Pro up 1-0, with the gap only growing as usage scales. Test 2. Coding benchmark performance. A solo dev ships a pull request on Friday. The model writes bad logic, and the bug hits production Monday morning. That's what a weak coding model actually costs you, and it's why benchmark numbers aren't just marketing. They tell you how often the model gets the logic right on hard problems. I went through the model cards and benchmark dashboards, and the contrast is pretty clear. DeepSeek V4 Pro max scores 93.5 on LiveCodeBench and 80.6 on SWE verified. Both vendor claims, so take those with a grain of salt, but they're strong numbers. OpenCode has no scores here at all because it's a harness, not a model, so it inherits whatever score the model you plug in gets. DeepSeek V4 Pro wins coding benchmarks because it actually has them. OpenCode has nothing to compare since it's purely a harness, and there's no aggregate score anywhere I could find. 93.5 on LiveCodeBench is the number on the board, and that puts DeepSeek V4 Pro 2-0. Test 3. Speed. 62 tokens per second is the number artificial analysis measured for DeepSeek V4 Pro on reasoning mode, and that's the figure to hold in your head for this test. If your agent is waiting 5 minutes between replies, you're not iterating, you're just watching a spinner, and that kills any productivity gain you thought you were getting. So I looked at the measured throughput data and community reports, and the contrast is pretty stark. DeepSeek V4 Pro outputs 62 tokens per second on reasoning, with a time to first token of 0.99 seconds on Together.ai per press reports. OpenCode's speed is entirely model dependent, and a GitHub issue from the community describes built-in models replying roughly every 5 minutes, which is pretty rough for any real workflow. DeepSeek V4 Pro takes speed, and it's not subtle. 62 tokens per second, with a sub 1 second first token. Beats community reports of 5-minute waits by a wide margin, and OpenCode's model flexibility didn't give it the speed advantage I thought it might. That's 3-0 for DeepSeek V4 Pro. Alright, so DeepSeek V4 Pro has been winning on price, benchmarks, and speed, but context limits and deployment flexibility are still ahead, and deployment is where OpenCode's whole value proposition actually lives. If you care about not being locked into a single model vendor, that test is the one you need to see before you decide anything. Test 4. Context and output limits. You paste a 50,000-line code base into your agent, and the model drops half of it, because the context window ran out. You don't always know what happened, and the output looks fine until it doesn't. For long horizon refactors or large file analysis, context size is the whole ballgame. What surprised me here is just how big the gap is. DeepSeek V4 Pro supports a 1 million token context window and up to 384,000 output tokens per call, per open router and artificial analysis. OpenCode's context is whatever the underlying model supports, and if you're running local with Allama, the default is just 4,096 tokens, which isn't a config tweak. That's a fundamental ceiling on what the tool can handle. DeepSeek V4 Pro wins context cleanly. 1 million tokens in, 384,000 tokens out, versus a 4,096 default when you run OpenCode locally. OpenCode's flexibility to swap in a high context model could partially close that gap, but the default setup is a real limitation, and that's 4-0 for DeepSeek V4 Pro. Test 5. Deployment and modality. You've built your whole workflow around one model, the provider raises prices or goes down for maintenance, and you're stuck. A developer who wants to swap between 75 different providers without rebuilding their setup from scratch has a very different need than someone who just wants the best single model they can get. So I went through the licensing and deployment docs for both, and this is where the comparison gets genuinely interesting. DeepSeek V4 Pro is MIT licensed and open weight, so you can self-host it or pull it through 6 or more API providers. OpenCode is open source and supports 75 plus LLM providers, running as a terminal app desktop client or IDE extension. And you can run V4 Pro inside OpenCode as one of those providers. The caveat is that these two tools aren't really on the same layer of the stack, so calling one better than the other on deployment is genuinely tricky. The decisive call is this: if you want to swap models freely across 75 providers without rebuilding anything, OpenCode wins that specific thing. And if you want one great open weight model you can self-host, DeepSeek V4 Pro is the answer. Deployment is a tie. Both tools are open, both are flexible, just at different levels, and they're genuinely complementary rather than competing. Final score: DeepSeek V4 Pro 4, OpenCode 0 with one tie. DeepSeek V4 Pro wins on raw capability and price. It's $0.435 per million input tokens with no subscription on top, a 1 million token context window, 384,000 tokens of output per call, 62 tokens per second throughput, and a 93.5 live code bench score. And for anyone running serious coding workloads while paying attention to unit economics, this is the model. OpenCode wins on freedom and flexibility. Bring your own key from 75 plus providers. Pay 0 platform markup on API costs. Swap models per task without rebuilding your setup. And run the whole thing from your terminal, desktop, or IDE. You can even run DeepSeek V4 Pro inside it, so you don't have to pick one or the other. For most people who want the best coding model at a real price, DeepSeek V4 Pro is the pick. 43 cents per million tokens, 1 million token context, 62 tokens per second. Go OpenCode only if you need to swap models freely across providers and never pay a subscription on top of your API bill. And the smartest move is probably running V4 Pro inside OpenCode and getting both. If you want to keep going on the free coding agent comparison, I just put out a video called Kimi Code versus Cursor, which is cheaper, and it gets into a very similar cost versus capability question with a different set of tools, so it's worth watching back to back with this one.